Get out of my office. There's no vacancy for you. Thomas Henderson, the vice president said as he slammed his hand on his mahogany desk, his face flushed with anger as he glared across at Zane Sawyer, the black man. Let me be very clear about something, young man, Henderson snarled, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't care what your GPA was or where you went to school. This isn't some diversity charity case we're running here. Zane's jaw clenched as he fought to keep his composure. He'd walked into this interview prepared to discuss investment strategies and market analysis. Instead, he was being verbally assaulted by a man who'd made his decision the moment Zane walked through the door. With all due respect, sir, Zane replied, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. My qualifications speak for themselves. I increased portfolio performance by 12% during my internship. And, Henderson cut him off with a dismissive wave. Qualifications? Son, you think some numbers on a resume matter when you can't even speak the same language as our clients? You think they want to do business with someone from the hood? The word hood hung in the air like a slap. This wasn't just rejection. This was character assassination based purely on the color of Zane's skin. That's when something snapped inside Zane. 8 months of polite rejections, 8 months of coded language and subtle dismissals, 8 months of watching less qualified white candidates get the jobs he deserved, it all came flooding out. But what Zane didn't know as he sat there feeling like the world's biggest failure was that his life was about to change. If you believe everyone should be treated with respect, no matter their skin color, then hit that subscribe button right now, because Zane's story is about to get a whole lot more complicated. Here's what I want to know. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone looked at you and made assumptions about who you are based on how you look? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because what happens next will show you why sometimes the people who judge us the harshest aren't always the ones with the real power. This is the story of Zane Sawyer, and how one act of kindness would expose a truth about racism, power, and second chances that nobody saw coming. To understand why that rejection hit Zane so hard, you need to know his story. Zane Sawyer wasn't some privileged kid playing dress-up in the corporate world. He was a 24-year-old who had clawed his way out of Southeast DC through pure determination and his mother's unwavering belief in education. Sarah Sawyer, his mother, had been a school teacher for 32 years before she retired. She raised Zane alone in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than opportunity, working double shifts and summer jobs to make sure her son never went without food. When Zane got accepted to Howard University on a partial scholarship, Sarah took out loans she couldn't afford to cover the rest. She believed in the promise that education would be his ticket to a better life. And Zane had delivered on that promise. Magna cum laude. Economics degree with a 3.8 GPA. 3 competitive internships where he'd proven himself again and again. During his summer analyst position, he'd increased portfolio performance by 12%, a feat that had his supervisors calling him exceptional and brilliant. But 8 months after graduation, Zane was still living in his childhood bedroom, working night shifts at a warehouse to help his mother pay bills. 8 months of sending out resumes. 8 months of first-round interviews that led nowhere. 8 months of watching his white classmates land the exact jobs he was getting rejected for. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was the pattern. The way every interviewer seemed enthusiastic about his resume over the phone, then somehow cooled when they met him in person. The way conversations shifted from his qualifications to questions about fit and comfort levels. Every interview felt like an audition where he was trying out for the role of acceptable black person rather than qualified financial analyst. That morning of interview 47, Zane had woken up at 5 a.m. He'd pressed his one good suit, the navy blue one he'd bought secondhand but had tailored to perfection. He'd practiced his answers in the mirror, researched Meridian Financial's quarterly reports until he could recite them backwards, and convinced himself that today would be different. The position was junior financial analyst, $55,000 starting salary. Not life-changing money, but enough to move out of his childhood bedroom, enough to start paying back his mother's sacrifices, enough to prove that the dream was real. During the drive to downtown DC, Zane had pumped himself up with positive self-talk. Today feels different, he'd said out loud in his Honda Civic. This is it. This is my shot. The Meridian Financial Group building was everything Zane aspired to. A 40-story glass tower that screamed success and power. Walking through that lobby, he'd felt like he belonged there. For exactly 18 minutes. But before he even made it to the elevators, the first sign of trouble appeared. "Excuse me, sir." The security guard's voice cut through the marble lobby like a knife. Zane turned to see a burly white man in his 50s approaching, hand resting casually on his radio. "Can I see some identification?" Zane looked around the bustling lobby. Dozens of people were walking past. White men in expensive suits, white women with designer briefcases. And none of them had been stopped. He was the only black person in sight, and apparently the only one who needed to prove he belonged there. "I have an interview," Zane said politely, reaching for his wallet. "Thomas Henderson's office, 2:30 appointment." The guard studied Zane's driver's license like it might be counterfeit, then picked up his desk phone. "Let me verify that for you." The way he said it suggested he doubted Zane was telling the truth. As the guard made his call, Zane watched 3 white men walk straight to the elevators without being questioned. One of them was wearing jeans and a polo shirt, less formally dressed than Zane in his tailored suit. But apparently their skin color was identification enough. "All right, you're cleared," the guard said finally, handing back Zane's license with obvious reluctance. 32nd floor, don't wander around. Don't wander around. Like he was a potential threat instead of a job candidate with a confirmed appointment. Thomas Henderson, the senior VP, had barely looked up from his phone during their conversation. When Zane tried to discuss his investment analysis thesis, Henderson cut him off mid-sentence. When Zane mentioned his internship achievements, Henderson's response was a dismissive, while scrolling through emails. But the real gut punch came with Henderson's loaded questions that had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with prejudice. "So Zane," Henderson said, finally looking up from his phone but with the expression of someone examining a curiosity. "You're really from DC? I mean, you're so articulate. Did you grow up in the city proper?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Zane knew exactly what Henderson was fishing for. Confirmation of whatever urban stereotypes were dancing through his head. "Yes, sir, Southeast DC. My mother was a school teacher there for over 30 years. Zane kept his voice level, professional, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. Henderson mused, as if this information required deep contemplation. "And tell me, how do you think you'd handle the pressures of working with our clientele? They can be quite demanding, very sophisticated. Do you think you'd be comfortable in our environment here? It's quite different from what you might be used to." There it was. The polite way of asking if a black man from Southeast DC could handle being around rich white people without embarrassing the company. "Mr. Henderson," Zane replied carefully, "I've worked with high-net-worth clients during my internships. My portfolio management increased returns by 12%, and I received commendations for my client relationship skills. I'm confident I can meet any professional standard you require." Henderson's smile was cold and patronizing. Of course. But this isn't just about numbers, you understand. It's about cultural fit. Our clients expect a certain level of familiarity with their world. Do you sail? Play golf? Where do you vacation?" Each question was designed to highlight how different Zane was, how he didn't belong in their exclusive club. Henderson wasn't evaluating his qualifications. He was confirming his own biases. "I focus my recreational time on continuing education and market research," Zane answered diplomatically. "I believe clients appreciate dedication to professional excellence above social connections." Henderson's expression suggested he disagreed. "Well, that's certainly one perspective. But in our business, relationships matter as much as spreadsheets. Our clients want to feel comfortable, to know they're dealing with people like them. People like them. Not people like Zane." The interview mercifully ended after Henderson made it clear that despite Zane's stellar qualifications, he had concerns about alignment with company culture. Translation: "We don't hire your kind here." The rejection was swift, brutal, and predictable. But the real insult came from Henderson's receptionist as Zane was leaving. Jennifer, that was her name according to the nameplate on her desk, was a blonde woman in her 30s with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that could freeze water. She'd been warm and professional when Zane arrived, but something had changed after his meeting with Henderson. As Zane approached her desk, he could see her talking to the next candidate, a young white man about Zane's age, also in a suit, also clearly there for an interview. "Mr. Patterson," Jennifer gushed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. "So wonderful to meet you. Mr. Henderson is just wrapping up, but I know he's excited to speak with you. Can I get you some coffee? Water? We have those little European sparkling waters if you'd prefer." She was treating this white candidate like a VIP guest at an exclusive resort. The contrast with how she'd greeted Zane, polite but distant, was stark. "That's so kind," Patterson replied. "Coffee would be great." "Absolutely. How do you take it? And please, make yourself comfortable. Mr. Henderson should be ready in just a few minutes. He's always so thorough with his interviews. Really takes the time to get to know candidates he's serious about." Serious about. The words hit Zane like a slap. Henderson had rushed through their meeting like he was checking a box, barely listening to Zane's responses. But apparently, this white candidate warranted care and attention. Jennifer finally turned to Zane, her demeanor shifting like someone had flipped a switch. The warmth evaporated, replaced by cold professionalism. "Mr. Sawyer," she said, her voice now flat and dismissive. "Mr. Henderson has decided to go in a different direction. We'll be in touch." No elaboration. No, "Thank you for your time." No, "We'll keep your resume on file." Just a curt dismissal delivered while she continued fussing over Patterson's coffee order. "Of course," Zane replied, maintaining his dignity even as his heart shattered. "Thank you for the opportunity." As he walked toward the elevators, he could hear Jennifer behind him. "Mr. Patterson, I think you're going to love working here. The culture is just wonderful. Very collegial, very much like a family." The same culture that apparently had no room for someone like Zane. Now, driving home in defeat, Zane's mind was spiraling into dark places. Maybe the dream was a lie. Maybe hard work wasn't enough when your skin was the wrong color. Maybe he'd been naive to think that a degree and good grades could level a playing field that was never meant to be level. That's when he spotted the elderly white man struggling with a flat tire on the highway shoulder. Zane's first instinct was to keep driving. He was emotionally drained, defeated, and frankly not in the mood to help anyone. "Not today," he muttered to himself. "I can't handle helping anyone today." But something made him slow down. Maybe it was his mother's voice in his head. All those lessons about always helping others, regardless of how you're feeling. Maybe it was the simple human decency that no amount of rejection could beat out of him. The man looked to be in his late 60s, well-dressed, but clearly flustered. His expensive watch caught the sunlight, and his tailored clothes suggested wealth, but he was fumbling with the tire iron like he'd never held a tool in his life. Zane pulled over and approached cautiously. "Need some help, sir?" The man looked up with genuine surprise, then immediate relief flooding his face. "Oh, thank goodness. I'm afraid I'm not very handy with these things. I'm Robert, by the way. Robert Caldwell." What struck Zane immediately was how Robert treated him, not with suspicion or condescension, but with genuine gratitude and respect. As Zane knelt down to change the tire, Robert didn't stand there impatiently checking his watch. Instead, he asked about Zane's day. Something about Robert's sincere interest broke down Zane's walls. Maybe it was the emotional exhaustion from the interview, or maybe it was finally meeting someone who seemed to see him as a human being rather than a stereotype. Whatever it was, Zane found himself opening up about his job search, his frustrations, his dreams that felt increasingly impossible. Robert listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about Zane's background and goals. He didn't offer empty platitudes or generic advice. He just listened, really listened, in a way that made Zane feel heard for the first time in months. What Zane didn't know was that this roadside conversation was about to change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you meet when you're not trying to impress anyone. And sometimes helping a stranger reveals more about your character than any interview ever could. The tire was fixed. But neither Zane nor Robert seemed ready to end their conversation. There was something about this roadside encounter that felt different from the polite small talk most strangers exchange. Robert leaned against his car, genuinely interested in continuing their discussion. "You know," Robert said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, "I wasn't always successful. I started from nothing in rural Virginia. My father was a tobacco farmer who could barely read, and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Richmond." This wasn't what Zane expected to hear from a man wearing a watch that probably cost more than Zane made in 6 months at the warehouse. Robert continued, painting a picture of his early struggles that felt surprisingly familiar. "I was the first person in my family to go to college. I thought on a work-study program, washing dishes in the cafeteria and cleaning dormitories to pay my way through. The other students looked at me like I didn't belong. Wrong clothes, wrong accent, wrong background. I faced my own form of discrimination. Maybe not the same as yours, but discrimination nonetheless." Zane felt something shift inside him. Here was this successful, wealthy man acknowledging not just Zane's struggles, but opening up about his own. Robert wasn't speaking down to him or offering empty encouragement. He was sharing his truth. "The thing that saved me," Robert continued, "was finding people who saw my potential instead of my limitations. People who judged me by my work ethic and my mind, not by where I came from or how I sounded." For the first time in months, Zane felt like someone actually saw him as a person, rather than a diversity checkbox or a threat to be managed. Robert's questions weren't probing for weaknesses or testing for cultural fit. They were genuine curiosity about Zane's aspirations and experiences. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Robert asked. Zane found himself explaining his finance background with more passion than he'd felt in any interview. He talked about his love for investment analysis, his fascination with market trends, his dream of helping people build wealth and security. For the first time in 8 months, talking about his career didn't feel like begging for scraps. Robert's eyes lit up as Zane spoke. "That's fascinating. You know, I've been in that field for decades. Started as an analyst myself, actually. There's something beautiful about finding undervalued opportunities that others overlook." The way Robert said it made Zane wonder if he was talking about more than just financial investments. As their conversation wound down, Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple business card. No fancy logo, no impressive titles, just R. Caldwell and a phone number. "I'd like to continue this conversation. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about your investment philosophy." Zane took the card, assuming Robert was just being polite. Successful older men sometimes did this, made networking offers they never intended to follow through on, but something about Robert's tone suggested he was serious. "I'd like that, sir. Thank you." They shook hands, and Zane drove away, feeling lighter than he had in months. Not because he thought this encounter would lead to anything concrete, but because for 30 minutes, someone had treated him like his thoughts and dreams mattered. After 47 rejections, that felt like a small miracle. The next morning, curiosity got the better of Zane. He'd been staring at Robert's business card over his coffee, and something made him pull out his laptop and type R. Caldwell into Google. The search results made his heart stop. Robert Caldwell, founder and CEO of Caldwell Industries. The first article showed a professional headshot of the same man who'd struggled with a tire iron just 24 hours earlier. But the headlines that followed made Zane's head spin. Caldwell Industries manages $2.3 billion in assets. Financial titan Robert Caldwell's investment strategy. East Coast power player expands portfolio. Zane stared at his laptop screen, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The man whose tire he'd changed wasn't just successful, he was one of the most powerful financiers on the East Coast. A man who could buy and sell companies like Meridian Financial without breaking a sweat. His mind raced through a dozen scenarios. Was this charity? Had Robert felt sorry for him and decided to throw him a bone? Was it some kind of elaborate setup? Rich people didn't just chat with random strangers on the highway, especially not strangers who looked like Zane. Pride warred with opportunity in Zane's chest. Part of him wanted to forget the whole thing, to avoid the humiliation of being someone's good deed for the day. But another part of him, the part that sounded like his mother, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the break he'd been working toward. For 2 hours, Zane stared at that business card. He almost threw it away 3 times. But finally, he picked up his phone and dialed the number, expecting to reach a secretary or assistant who would politely brush him off. Instead, Robert answered personally on the second ring. "Zane, I was hoping you'd call. Are you free this afternoon? If you're watching this and you've ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about your situation completely flipped upside down, hit that subscribe button because Zane's story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming." The roadside stranger who couldn't change his own tire was about to change Zane's entire life in ways that would expose the ugly truth about how power, race, and opportunity really work in America. They met at a small cafe in Georgetown, not the gleaming corporate tower that Zane had expected. Robert was already there when Zane arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee, looking more like someone's grandfather than a financial titan worth hundreds of millions. "I wanted to talk to you away from all the corporate nonsense," Robert said as Zane sat down. "Offices have a way of making conversations feel transactional. What we're about to discuss is far more important than business." Zane felt his stomach tighten. The way Robert said it suggested this wasn't going to be a simple networking coffee. There was something deliberate, almost calculated about this meeting. "Zane, I haven't been entirely honest with you," Robert began, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Since our encounter yesterday, I've been watching you from afar. Not in a creepy way," he added with a slight smile, "but in a professional capacity." Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped around his coffee cup. "I called some contacts, did some research. Your professors at Howard speak very highly of you. Dr. Williams in the economics department said you were one of the most naturally gifted analysts he'd seen in 20 years of teaching. Your internship supervisors described your work as exceptional and innovative." Zane's mind reeled. This man had been investigating him. But before he could process that fully, Robert dropped an even bigger bombshell. "I also made some calls about your recent interviews." The words hit Zane like a physical blow. His blood ran cold as he realized what Robert was saying. This wasn't a chance encounter anymore. This was something else entirely. Robert's voice hardened, taking on a tone that Zane imagined he used in boardrooms when someone had crossed him, including one to Thomas Henderson at Meridian Financial. Zane felt the world tilt sideways. Robert knew about his rejection. Robert knew about the humiliation, the dismissive treatment, the barely concealed racism, but how and why? What Thomas didn't know, Robert continued, his eyes never leaving Zane's face, is that Caldwell Industries is Meridian's largest client. We control 40% of their portfolio. We're not just a client, we're the client that keeps their lights on. The power dynamic in that small cafe shifted so dramatically that Zane could almost feel it in the air. Robert wasn't just successful. He wasn't just wealthy. He had leverage over the very people who had rejected Zane, who had made him feel small and unwanted. "I had an interesting conversation with Thomas about his hiring practices," Robert said, his tone now carrying the quiet menace of someone who held all the cards. "Particularly his recent decision to pass on a Howard graduate with a 3.8 GPA and stellar recommendations." Zane's hands began to shake slightly. He didn't know whether to feel grateful, terrified, or completely overwhelmed. This man, this stranger he'd helped on the highway, had just revealed that he'd been pulling strings behind the scenes of Zane's life. "Mr. Caldwell," Zane started, but Robert held up a hand. "Let me finish, son, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see everything that's happened to you over the past 8 months. Robert's expression softened slightly, but his voice retained its steel. "Thomas Henderson isn't just prejudiced, he's stupid. He's so blinded by his biases that he can't recognize talent when it's sitting right in front of him. And that kind of stupidity is expensive." Zane felt like he was watching his life from outside his body. 24 hours ago, he'd been another rejected job candidate. Now, he was sitting across from one of the most powerful men in finance, learning that his rejection had set off a chain reaction he never could have imagined. "Here's what Thomas doesn't understand about power. Robert continued. Real power isn't about who you can keep out. It's about who you can bring in. It's about recognizing value where others see threats. It's about building teams that reflect the world we actually live in, not the narrow, privileged bubble that men like Thomas mistake for reality. The weight of Robert's words settled over Zane like a heavy blanket. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was something far more complex and powerful, a reckoning that had been building since the moment Zane had pulled over to help a stranger. I want you to understand something, Zane, Robert said, leaning back in his chair. What happened at Meridian wasn't about your qualifications. It wasn't about your fit or your comfort level. It was about Thomas Henderson's limitations, not yours. And those limitations are about to cost him more than he ever imagined. Zane realized he was holding his breath. Whatever was coming next would either validate everything he'd believed about merit and fairness, or shatter it completely. But one thing was certain. This conversation was about to reveal truths about power, race, and opportunity that went far deeper than anything he'd learned in business school. The man who couldn't change his own tire was about to change the entire game. Robert leaned forward with the intensity of a man about to change someone's life forever. I'm starting a new division focused on emerging markets and diverse investment strategies. I need someone sharp, hungry, and authentic. Someone who understands that the future of finance isn't going to look like the past. Someone like you. Zane's heart hammered in his chest as Robert continued. The position is Director of Strategic Analysis. $85,000 starting salary, equity options that could be worth significant money if we're successful. And you'd report directly to me. No middle management, no corporate politics, no one questioning whether you belong in the room. Before Zane could respond, Robert held up his hand with a slight smile that suggested he wasn't finished delivering surprises. But there's more. Thomas Henderson called me this morning. Apparently, Meridian suddenly has an opening for you. Funny how that works when your biggest client asks pointed questions about your hiring practices. The full scope of what Robert had done hit Zane like a freight train. This man hadn't just offered him a job. He'd used his influence to pry open doors that had been slammed shut. He'd weaponized his power to correct an injustice that would have otherwise gone unnoticed and unpunished. So you have a choice, Zane, Robert said, his voice calm but his eyes intense. You can take the safe job at Meridian, working for people who didn't want you until they were forced to reconsider. Or you can bet on yourself and work with someone who saw your worth from the beginning. Zane stared at Robert for a long moment, feeling the weight of 8 months of rejection, his mother's sacrifices, and his own dreams pressing down on him. But when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate what you did at Meridian. I really do, but I'd rather work for someone who saw my worth from the start than for people who only changed their minds because they were pressured into it. Robert's smile could have powered the entire cafe. I was hoping you'd say that. But then, Robert delivered one final revelation that reframed everything Zane thought he understood about their encounter. I need to tell you something, Zane. This wasn't entirely chance. For the past 2 years, I'd been quietly tracking promising graduates who were being overlooked by traditional firms. I'd been watching patterns, identifying talent that others missed because of bias or narrow-mindedness. Zane's mouth fell open as Robert continued. You weren't the first person I've helped on the side of the road, but you might be the most important. Your situation with Henderson wasn't unique. It was systemic, and I decided it was time to start doing something about it. The man who'd seemed so helpless with a tire iron had been orchestrating a quiet revolution in corporate America, one roadside encounter at a time. 6 months later, Zane was thriving at Caldwell Industries. His emerging markets division had already identified 3 undervalued opportunities that generated significant returns. But more importantly, he'd started his own informal network, connecting overlooked graduates with opportunities and mentors who valued substance over stereotypes. Every few weeks, Zane would get a call from Robert about another promising candidate who'd been passed over. Another chance to correct the system's blind spots. What had started as one man's flat tire had become a movement to change how talent was recognized and rewarded in corporate America. Robert had been right about one thing. Real power wasn't about who you could keep out. It was about who you could bring in. As Zane often told the graduates he now mentored, sometimes the detour is the destination. And sometimes helping a stranger helps you find yourself. Here's my question for you. Have you ever had someone in power use their influence to open doors for you, or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is lift each other up. Remember, the next time you see someone who needs help, you never know who they might turn out to be. But more importantly, you never know who you might become in the process of helping them. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.